Well, the airstrikes are also putting the future of the peace talks in Geneva in jeopardy. The negotiations have stalled. The regime's delegation refused the opposition's precondition to cease fighting ahead of any negotiations. UN envoy Staffan de Mistura was due to meet with the opposition, but that meeting has been cancelled. Well, Simon McGregor-Wood has been following the Syrian talks at Geneva's Palace of Nations and joins us now. Simon, here we are again then, with the fighting on the ground. It's raging on. It seems like the whole process is at an impasse right now.
It does seem that way. I'm outside the main opposition HNC factions hotel in downtown Geneva, where they are deliberating on what to do next. We have spoken to a number of them. They're moving down to the President Wilson Hotel for further discussions, including with ambassadors of friendly nations who are supporting their cause. They have told me this morning that they are not pulling out of this process, despite what's going on the ground. They made their feelings about this Russian-backed Syrian government offensive very clear yesterday when they held an impromptu press conference outside the UN and then cancelled their afternoon session with de Mistura in part as a protest to what's going on the ground. But they are sticking with the process, they say today. They are staying positive, and they are expecting to go back into the UN at some point and have a meeting with Mr. de Mistura.
You mentioned that the opposition made their feelings clear. I think it's fair to say they expressed annoyance that Russia and the Syrian regime have stepped up their attacks to coincide with these talks. But should we be surprised by that as a tactic?
Well, I mean, in brutal terms, this is a war or a civil war, and one side has achieved something of successful military momentum. It's the Syrian government, backed by the Russian Air Force. They are beginning to win on the battlefield. That does not necessarily make the Syrian government side and its allies particularly want to make concessions here at the peace talks. If you're a cynic, you might suggest that if you're doing well on the battlefield, why would you necessarily come to the peace talks and make concessions? One view, I suppose, is that they may be trying to achieve more success on the battlefield to strengthen their negotiating hand. But of course, it's not only the Syrian opposition delegation that is annoyed, to put it mildly, with what's happening on the battlefield. It's very clear that the Americans, the British government and the Saudis, people who are backing the opposition, are incensed with the Russians. There is some very strong rhetoric being bandied around, suggesting that the Russians are playing a double game. On the one hand, sponsoring this UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which sets up this process and the possible roadmap towards a transition. And on the other, they appear to be stirring things up on the battlefield by backing this latest Syrian government regime. So there's a lot of ill will towards the Russians, and it's not only from the opposition.
Simon, thank you very much. Simon McGregor-Wood there in Geneva.